Welcome, my dear ones. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we'll be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Natalie shares with us her two births and how she stepped more fully into advocating for what she wanted. She experiences two beautiful births and reflects deeply on her own path of awakening. We also reflect on the connection between birth and motherhood. Her stories are entertaining and insightful, sharing the unpredictability of birth and parenting. Enjoy. Hello, welcome again this week for another Transform Your Birth story. And I just love this woman. I've been blessed enough to watch her go through two babies, and she's going to share both stories today. And every story feeds the next. So there's lots of wisdom that comes out with this beautiful woman, and it's been a privilege to watch her. So welcome to Nat. Hi, darling.
Hello, Tracy. Lovely to be here. So nice to see your smiling face after a long night of feeding.
Yeah, I'll bet. All right. So, Nat, tell us, when you were having your first baby, your little boy, how were you feeling, and what sort of about giving birth, and what did you do to prepare?
Yeah, well, it was a while ago now. So my son Sydney's 3 in about a month. So I have to cast my mind back. But I was fortunate to have my mum as my birth partner, and we did your calm birth at the time class as a prenatal prep. And I must admit, I was really in the dark about a lot of stuff to do with my body and about birth. I didn't actually know what a placenta was, hand on heart. So it was a very steep learning curve. And a plug for your course. I found the 2 days was really fabulous, both for understanding the anatomy and the physiology of birth, and just how wonderful our bodies are if we can trust them. And also just for building that relationship with my mum, because she came to this obviously second, third time round. She'd had 2 kids of her own, and she was quite keen to refresh her knowledge, and also just to drop those defaults of kind of what she had because she'd also given birth herself, which is a bit unique, given birth partners are often romantic spouses. So I found that a really good update on the information about giving birth. But I also did all sorts of fun things. Like I did acupuncture and moxie. Is it they put it on your to sort of have the baby in the right position, did all the spinning baby stuff. So I just threw myself in actually, and found the whole thing to be just a wonderful journey of discovery, from pretty much a base of zero knowledge to then get as much prepared as I could before having Sid. And it was quite interesting. As I got closer and closer to the due date, I was drawing on my mum's history quite a bit, because I knew she had gone to 42 weeks with her first child. So I was pretty relaxed actually passing the due date, and just, listening to my body and feeling quite comfortable up until the point of birth that, he might take a while to come. So that was quite helpful to know both the theory, but also what my mum's lived experience had been when she had her children. That was quite deterministic for me too, because Sid was born at 42 weeks exactly.
There you go. Women can feel a lot of pressure leading up to that birth. It was great you had that reference point to just recognise that babies take what they take to grow, and in our family, they might take a little bit longer or might not. It's always different. So you didn't get stressed by that at all?
I was lucky to have the continuity program at the Canberra Centre, and I had a midwife with me throughout it, and she was with me an advocate for my birth preferences. So I used the template you provided, but I definitely tailored that to my own preferences. I was pretty relaxed about interventions, but I really wanted to have a natural start to the birth. I really wanted to go into spontaneous labour. And that idea crept up on me. It wasn't something I, planned from the start, but as I got closer to my due date, and as you said rightly, started to have conversations with doctors and even my midwife about what is the process and the protocols at hospital if, you start to go over that. I was lucky to have that midwife by my side for just the regular updates. I also, and this is probably not always the case, but I knew exactly when I conceived, and I was quite late in my cycle. I have a friend as my donor, and we actually conceived naturally, and we knew that it was right at the end of my cycle. So I had that bit of information as well. So when I was talking to the doctors, I said, look, I know that this 42-week even itself is a bit, the 40-week point is a bit arbitrary for me, because I know I was quite late in my cycle. So I had a couple of bits of information that I could use to advocate for myself. The fact that I was a bit late conceiving, the fact that my mum had a late first baby, and also the fact that I was really healthy. But the factors that weren't in my favor were my age. I was 37, I think 38 at the time or 37 actually. So I was definitely in that latter part of my 30s. So of course, all the doctors were referring to the relative risks, or the relative risks of these things. And, I would quiz them all. What does that actually mean? So I did push back on induction, but in the end, I had a stretch and sweep. So I had the stretch and the sweep at about 30, 41, and 2 or 3 days I had the stretch and sweep. And then the day that I was due to be induced, so I did agree to be induced. It got to the point where, as a person who likes to take, good advice and make decisions, I didn't want to be, reckless or foolhardy in ignoring that advice. So I did book in for induction at 41 and 5. And that morning, my midwife called and said, look, I actually think we won't be able to get you a bed for the morning, but we'll get one for the afternoon. I said, well, actually, Xavier, I think something might be happening here. And she and I were both very excited. And by that sort of mid-morning, things had started to really happen. So I dodged induction. But having said that, I was prepared to do it if that was also going to be best for the baby. Yeah.
Cool. So tell us about the birth. Tell us how it unfolded.
Yeah, so it was very exciting when I started to get those little feelings that morning. I hadn't experienced Braxton Hicks, so this was really the first time I started to feel contractions. And it actually started around 5 or 6 a.m., but I just, first pregnancy, I just, went back to sleep. But I spoke to my midwife, and I also spoke to my mum. My mum was going for a walk with a friend, and she's like, should I come over now? And I'm like, no, go for your walk and then come over. So she came around 10 o'clock, and when she opened the door to my house, she looked at my face, and my face was like, Mum, this is not a spiritual thing. And she said to me, no, Nat, it's labor. And I said, my goodness, I was a bit shell-shocked, I think, because it was intense from the start.
It was work. Yes. The labor of birth. The work of birth is labor.
Yeah, I think I actually was a bit shell-shocked. I thought, oh yeah, I've played a lot of sport. This is fine. I can do this. But labor is, I think, certainly those sensations are whole body experiences. So I had contractions pretty strong from the start, but they were very spaced out, and they continued all day. And again, with the continuity program, my midwives were able to visit me at home, which was it's such a privilege. So I had a visit at about 2 o'clock, and then another one around 10 o'clock. And throughout that day, I was actually a lot more stationary than I thought I would have been, given I'd done all the theory. But when it actually came to the labor, as I said, I was a bit like, oh, okay. So I had my earphones in, I was listening to breathing, but there was hot water bottles, and I think I had the TENS machine at one point in that early labor. I did have a check at 2 o'clock and at 10 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock, I was not much, like I was 3, maybe 4 centimeters. And then they did check me again at 10 o'clock, and things had really started to ramp up. And actually I was still only about 4 centimeters, which was quite deflating, because I was getting quite tired at that point. It had been about, by that point it had been a long time, almost a full day of laboring at home. And the midwife did think I was getting a bit tired, so they suggested I did go into hospital. And I also had the complication that at midnight it would clock over that I was 42 weeks. So I wouldn't be in the low risk category. I would suddenly be in high risk.
Please.
So I know. So it's such
Oh,
an arbitrary thing.
yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So I packed up and went into hospital and, checked in, was admitted just before midnight. And that drive to the hospital was actually pretty intense. I was very, very uncomfortable. I'm very tall, and I just found the space really constricted. And by the time I got into hospital, I was pretty worked up, actually. I was getting contractions. I mean, that was 3 years ago. I can't remember, but they were pretty regular. They were regular enough to go in. And when I presented in the birth centre, I had a temperature. So they suggested I go on an IV drip, and I might have to and because of that, I might have to move into the different ward. But I did ask them to just maybe hold off with the antibiotics for a little bit, because I thought I just had quite a tough drive into hospital. I thought I might calm down and the temperature might drop. I'm not usually a person that presents with a fever. So, but unfortunately within the next sort of 30 minutes when they did it again, I was still high. So the recommendation was to go on antibiotics and a drip. And of course, at that point, because they were putting things in, they were putting cannula in, they said, oh, look, we might look to do Syntocin soon, because you're not really progressing beyond what you were at home. And at that point, I didn't necessarily want to take the antibiotics because of the good microbes I wanted to have when he was born. So I'd already sort of had that happen. And then when they said the Syntocin, I thought, well, if I can get things moving a little bit, again, first time mum, I was quite happy to take the additional help, I guess, at that point. I wasn't philosophical about saying no, and I was quite practical about it. And I was still so thrilled that I'd gone into spontaneous labour. So at this point, it was all a bit of a bonus. So anyway, and I was getting tired. So again, I think it was fairly soon after going on the antibiotics, I also went on the Syntocin, and that started to, ramp it up. Which is interesting, because that would obviously raise my temperature. At the time they were trying to drop my temperature, but anyway, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure. But yes, so it was about midnight when I went on to those interventions, and then I was pushing for a bit. Sorry, not pushing for a bit. I was, breathing through the contractions, but I was getting really weary. And so it was very soon after that they suggested the epidural, and at that point I was pretty grateful for it. So, so I had the epidural. And it didn't really work, actually. So they had to, and at one point I accidentally pulled out there's a tube that comes over your shoulder, and that disconnected. So they had to put a second epidural in. And that was probably the hardest part of the whole labour, because my whole body was just vibrating with the contractions. They were very, very intense at that point. And they wanted me to perch on the side of a bed and have, something put into the base of my spine. So I was finding that very, very hard to stay still. I think it took about half an hour to get it in. Wow. So they did get it in, and that actually gave me instant relief. So I was able to take a couple of hours sleep, I think, or it might have been an hour or so, but I was able to have a short sleep. By the time I woke up, I was 10 centimeters. So it actually worked beautifully for me. It gave me the rest I needed at about 2 or 3 o'clock. And I woke up at about 4 or 5 and was very excited to hear it was time to push. So, which was my favourite part of the whole labour.
Was it? Tell us, why was this part your favourite? Tell us about that.
Well, it's a chance to be proactive in the labour, I felt. I'd been a little bit passive, I would say, through the whole first stage. I'd been sort of waiting for my body to do its thing and, breathing through and trusting my body. But I'm quite I'm a kind of go-getter person. So suddenly I was able to, to be an active participant in my labour, I felt. And it was interesting. My midwife was there, and she was actually using the counting method, which really worked for me. And I think she had to do that because of the epidural. I couldn't necessarily feel the urge to push. I could just
Yeah.
feel the contractions. So she was counting me into the contractions, and then I was pushing for a sustained period, and then I was taking a breath and I was doing it again. And part of that process was quite rhythmic, and it reminded me of my rowing training. So I used to row not that long ago. I used to row, and the races we did in the UK were bump racing, and you had to be really, really, really strong out of the gate and row really hard. But you also knew that if you didn't bump the boat in front of you, you still had to row for another 2K. So you knew you had to have the stamina to go the distance, but you also were sprinting. So I quite liked it. It was like the rhythm, being in a boat, being with your rowing crew. It conjured back that training, and I really loved it. So,
did she change your position, Nat, when it came to the pushing stage, or were you still on the bed?
I was pretty much for the most of the day, even from when I got the first drip, I was on my back. And I surprised myself in that I felt quite familiar and comfortable with that position.
Lying flat on your back or just sitting up a little bit?
Legs up, yeah. So obviously with the pushing stage, they had my knees up, and actually I had my mum on one side and my midwife on the other, and they were both holding my knees and my legs. So it was a real, it felt like a real team sport. In retrospect, I could have moved around, or I could have tried moving around a bit, but I was quite comfortable at the time. I thought, no, this
wherever
feels
you
right.
feel comfortable. Yeah.
And I was on my back with my legs up, and I think I was slightly inclined a little bit so that I could, feel part of it and not be too distant from the action. I felt like I was right there. So
Wow.
Yeah.
And when he arrived, what was that like?
Well, there's a moment I cherish in the labour, and that was when, without actually asking, my midwife just got my hand and put it on his head when he was crowning. And I think had she asked, I might have gone, oh, I'm not sure. You don't know the counterfactual. But I remember when she put my hand on his head, it just shifted straight away from labour to I'm going to meet my son. It became less about my body and labour and more about the baby, and the baby became the centre of the labour. And it was a really powerful shift, and I just got so excited because, I don't know, their little heads are so soft, and you feel their hair and it's so downy, and I just got really excited. It actually is a very emotional moment. It was a much cherished memory, and when I felt his little head, that's when I was like, all right, let's do this. I want to meet him. And then luckily he came out pretty quickly. I think it was only about 45 minutes of pushing. Oh no, sorry, it was about an hour and 15 minutes of pushing with Sid. And then they put him straight on me, and of course the first thing is, oh my God, move, say something, cry, do something. There's that moment of fear of, is he okay? Is he okay? And then they make the noise, and you just exhale and go, oh, he's here. And it was wonderful. And then I remember I was so new to holding a baby. I don't think I'd even changed a nappy before him, that my midwife had to kind of go, now just, make sure he can breathe. And like, she was just slightly adjusting the way I was holding him. But they had him on me straight away, and it was skin to skin, and it was just beautiful, a wonderful moment. And I've got a mum who's quite good at photographing and video, capturing moments. So I've even got some of those special moments on film of just my voice just quivering of, oh, he's here. And it was really, really special. And I look back at those videos sometimes, and it's a really special moment.
Wow. Oh, I got lost in that story. That was beautiful. So tell me.
Well, it was about 30 hours, I think. He was born by midday the next day, the day that I was 42 weeks. Yeah.
And then you end up pregnant with a little girl.
I do.
Tell us how you were feeling after that first experience, how you were feeling, and what sort of preparation did you do the second time round, and what did you take from that first birth that you wanted to potentially do differently with the second?
Yeah, great questions. So I felt pregnant when I was living in the United States, And I looked back on the midwifery-led program at the Canberra Hospital with so much gratitude, I think, for having that midwife by my side. And for knowing that I could access doctors, like the best, great obstetricians, I could access them in Australia, but they weren't the centre of the care.
Yeah.
So I was doing some prenatal visits in the US, and the system there for those who have good insurance is great, but it was very doctor driven and quite baby focused. So I just, given such a positive first birth experience, there were some interventions, sure, but I was able to be an advocate for myself. I decided to come back to Australia to have Adelaide, my second child, Addie, because I did actually really trust the Australian medical system. I also wanted to have a support system around me. The US was great, but in Australia, I just find the baseline energy is much calmer. The US is quite a, pressure cooker place sometimes, and I just wanted to have the right environment around me while I was both pregnant and after having the baby. So I drew lessons from the first birth that were, again, trust your body, try to push back on generic advice. And at this point I was 40. So actually, no, I was 39 when I was pregnant, but I was due to give birth just after my 40th birthday. So I knew I was going to be 40 at the point of delivery. So I think I went from geriatric mother to AMA, like advanced maternal age or something like that, which actually sounds better. I was like, okay, I'll take that. But I went into just another risk factor. So I knew that, the protocols and the general advice for me, without regard to my actual experience and my actual, physiology, would be pro-intervention. So I didn't really interrogate it, but there was a chance I was hearing anecdotally, I would probably be induced in the US around 37, 38 weeks. And I was like, nah, don't want that. So came back, got back to Australia and touched base with you, which was great to do a refresher. I really, that switched my mind from, the moving process and all the bits of pieces I was juggling with getting my son back into the care and me back to work, to actually start to focus on the baby, which was really timely. Got the birth preferences. This time I didn't have the midwife program. I wasn't, it's obviously highly subscribed, and I hadn't joined the wait list early enough. And my midwife's actually overseas doing development work, so I couldn't tap that network. Unfortunately, I tried, because it's such a wonderful program, and I really do wish that all women got the chance to do it, to access it. But anyway, I doing the course with the refresher with you, we also talked about support in the room. And this time round, I really wanted to be like raw and just like let my inner kind of lioness come out. I really wanted to go primal. I looked back on my first birth and I thought I was actually a little bit passive in the process. I was letting things happen to me, and I was quite, I knew the theory, but I didn't really have someone there coaching me through it. And my mum is great in the room. She's my oxytocin, source. So she holds my hand and she's there with me and smiles at me and helps. But she didn't really have those skills to coach me through being active. And she also has some RSI. So, she's not able to give me that massage and the hands-on touch that I kind of crave as a single mum, just to have that like little bit more hands-on support. So at your advice, actually, I got a doula, Kylie, who was wonderful, and got in touch with her quite late in the process, but still very valuable to just get me ready, get my mind focused on the birth, and start to nest, I guess. I nested a bit later this time. So that was great. So Kylie was my doula. So I did quite a lot to prepare. I did it a little bit as a race at the end, but I felt going into those weeks where I was potentially giving birth, I felt, I just finally unpacked the house. For example, I think I unpacked the house at 38 weeks and I had a baby shower at 38 weeks. So it was all very just in time. But it was good. I felt ready.
I remember us having those conversations when I thought it would be a good idea for you to have a doula, because the pressure on women as they age gets greater. and this is an interesting one, even the evidence on advanced maternal age, whilst we can have evidences and trends around, at this age there's a higher rate of, and they go into those figures. And that's one piece of the puzzle. It's not the full puzzle. And part of making good decisions, pardon me, around if to induce or not really relies on the health and the overall picture of the pregnancy itself. So you made the comment, Nat, about in America, they induce at 37 weeks. Now, given that it took you 42 weeks to grow Sid, that could be 5 weeks early for your baby. That could have a huge impact on their developmental process, because we do know there's a lot of brain development that goes on in those last few weeks. So these generic sort of policies of, well, if you've got this condition, we do this, is advice. It's based on evidence and trends, but to make decisions on that information alone is very short-sighted, because really it's about looking at the whole picture. And so we take that information and we put it in its place, and then we get a sense of what else is going on in this pregnancy. Are there other risk factors? What's the fluid levels like? What's the state of the placenta? These are all things we can observe to help us to make really good decisions around that. And I remember us having a conversation about that, and I knew there'd be pressure on you to induce, particularly if this baby was going to take another 42 weeks to grow. And it's worth, really kind of tuning in as well as to how do you feel about that prospect? Does that feel like it's the right thing for you to do? Because I think there's an intelligence in women's bodies. And often I do this. I get women to go really quiet, close their eyes and go in and see the two paths that they can take, and just get a sense of what path feels the most true and right for you and your baby. We don't often just even ask the women. And women know if they need to be, often, I can't say all the time, but because we have a lot of noise around us. But if there's something not quite right with the pregnancy, typically women know, they can feel it. There's something that they get rumbles about. So we've got to start to also tap into our own inner wisdom around these sorts of things in order to make good decisions, because inducing really early, like 37 weeks, could have been really detrimental. And we do know that there's evidence to suggest that the rising rates of induction, which for first-time mothers are up around 50% in this country, not quite 50%. That's extraordinary, and it's wrong. Yeah, it's like completely wrong. Yeah. And it's not leading to better maternal or baby outcomes. In fact, what we're finding is that more babies need more help.
I'm no doctor, but the rise in things like ADHD and things, you don't know. I mean, if you're bringing babies into the world 4 or 5 weeks before their brains are fully developed, I mean, we just don't know the consequences of these sorts of short-sighted interventions.
That's right. And it's hard for women to make these decisions because nobody wants to play, Russian roulette with their babies. We all want our babies to land here safely. So it's weighing up those risks, which can be very tricky. So with this one, how did you go towards the end, the pointy end of the pregnancy? What was that like?
You thought the first one was a story. Gosh, I've got a story for you now, Tracy. And you're listening.
Bring it on.
So, well, actually, I was a little nervous this time round about that pressure to induce, because I knew I was older. I knew I didn't have my midwife there. And I also... I've heard some things in terms of just the culture and the advice around induction, and at Canberra Hospital, I know there's been, shifting culture there too. So I was a bit nervous. I didn't have the full trust, I'd say, in the hospital system that I thought I would coming back from the US in those few months I got back. But I had full trust in my body. So that was the difference. I'm healthy. I'm very lucky. I've been blessed. I was able to conceive quite easily. I know that's a real struggle for a lot of women. So my body was able to make babies quite easily, and I was having I had stronger symptoms the second time round, but I think it's very, it was very much within the normal curve. The one thing I had in my back pocket, which I was grateful for, is that I knew this time round I'd conceive really early. So I followed this method called the baby DOS method. I don't know, might work, might not, but it sort of gives you advice on if you want a boy or a girl, what might be a good time ovulating to try. And for a girl, it's early. So it's before you ovulate, actually. So this time round, I knew I was really early, and therefore I thought maybe I might have that extra couple of weeks up my sleeve, that she may not be pushing that 42-week point, because again, my mum's history was both my brother and I were born at 42 weeks or thereabouts. So I was grateful for that little bit of maybe, advice, that little bit of information factor that might help bring her a bit earlier, because I did expect to face again the strong pressure to induce, and I really didn't want to. It comes from perhaps just the accumulation of these discussions, this sense of just if there's no factor they can point to specific to me in my experience at that moment, such as, low liquid or whatever, I really wanted to push back on induction. In the end, she came at 43 days. So she was right on. So I never really had to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, yes, drawing from my mum's experience, I was born within 5 or 6 hours. Second time baby was really quick. So at about 41 or 40 weeks, I woke up, and I think I had the mucus plug or the show, and I went, "Ooh, this is exciting," and that was the Tuesday. And that day I started to get the period cramps. And I remember listening to a podcast you'd done with someone who said second time round, actually, it was kind of strong period pain. So I thought, oh, that's good to know. And so when I started to experience this, I told my doula, and I got excited. And they were quite regular, but they were very mild. It was, I was cooking dinner, I was taking my son to daycare. It was a normal day. But as it did get later in the day, I was, on the ball, and I was trying to, again, be really quite active, do lunges. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be passive this time. I'm going to be active. But it got to 8, 9 o'clock at night, and I thought, look, I'll just call the hospital and let them know I've had the day I've had. But really, I suspect I'm staying at home tonight. So I spoke to them, and the midwife on call was awesome. She was so funny. She said, yep, no, stay at home. She said, you want to come in when you're starting to think, I should have got a cat. And so I thought that was hilarious.
I should have got a cat.
I should have got a cat. And I should not have gone for a second baby. So I was definitely not at that point.
I love that.
So we went to bed, and I actually had contractions that night and didn't sleep very well. The other thing the midwife did say on the phone call was, look, because I said, oh, look, should I stay active? Am I, can I will this baby to come in? Can I be active and, stay on my feet? And she said, look, you might find yourself 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, having done all this all night, and nothing's changed, and you're exhausted. She said, you need to rest. So that was also really helpful. So two bits of good advice. Yeah. So I went to bed. I sort of slept on and off. When I woke up in the morning, they were stronger, but they were actually more spaced out. So they were like one every 10 minutes or something. So it was actually quite a long time at this point. And I was a bit disoriented, because I had understood, with my mum, things that happened quite quickly, and second time, the early labour's quite short. So I was a bit disheartened, and the contractions got quite strong that day, but it got to about 3 or 4 o'clock, time to get ready to go and pick my son up. And they stopped. They completely stopped. And actually, I paused then, because I'd organised for my son to be staying with a friend. So, of course, I wasn't picking him up. I was very grateful. He stayed there the Tuesday night and the Wednesday night, and this was now the Wednesday. And I said to them, look, I think things have just stopped, but could you keep him? And, of course, lovely friends, they did. But, yeah, I went to bed that night thinking, what is going on? This is really odd. I was ready to go. I had my hospital bag packed, and it just stopped. So I went to sleep, and I actually had a really good sleep that night, because, there might have been a little bit here and there, but it wasn't anything rhythmic or, progressing. And about 4 a.m. the next morning, the Thursday, and I should say the Wednesday was International Women's Day, and I was so hoping she'd be born on International Women's Day. I was like, come on, baby, come on. But no, she was going to do things in her own time. So the Wednesday clocked over, and no International Women's Day baby. So the Thursday morning, in the morning, I woke up and I just had this heaviness in my bowel, a real heaviness of And sorry, one more thing I should say. I went to the hospital that afternoon just for a routine checkup on the Wednesday.
Right.
I didn't get measured. I decided not to.
It's an interesting
Yeah.
choice.
It was an interesting choice. Still
Yeah.
looking back on it, maybe we'll come back to this one. I didn't. So I went home after that routine check. That doctor was starting to think, oh, at your age and the water and things, she was starting to feel a little bit like we might need to do some form of intervention. But she said, look, just go home and come back on the Saturday morning. So they brought my next appointment, earlier. Anyway, went home, had the Wednesday night sleep. Thursday morning, I had this real heaviness in my bowel and all across my pelvic floor. And I kept going to the bathroom trying to relieve myself, and actually did a couple of times, but still just had this real sense of, heaviness, but no contractions. So I was like, what is going on? So I ended up having lunch with my doula because I was like, I need advice. This is like totally confusing me. And she said, look, do something that takes your mind off it. You just need to relax, Nat. I know you had an idea of what your second labor might be, but you just need to just take your mind off it, do something you enjoy. And at that point, my mum actually said, well, why don't we go for a swim? Because you love swimming, Nat. You love the water. So we actually went straight to Stromlo Pool, and on arrival mentioned, look, I think I'm in early labor, but, things aren't moving. And they actually suggested we go in the kids' swimming school pool because it's the warmest pool and there was a couple of lanes free. So that was very kind. So we jumped in the pool and I started to do some breaststroke, and then things started.
Wow.
So it was about 4:00 on the Thursday, and we swam in the pool for an hour. And in that hour, I'm pretty sure I had my final first stage labor, and possibly even went into transition, because I was doing some laps at one point, and then I would always have to go back to the edge. And I was like, it's hilarious now I look back. I was on the edge of the pool going, breathing through the contractions, and feeling really good. Doing lunges under the water, having the weightlessness. It was actually incredibly comfortable. And I kept saying to Mum, what should we do? Should we go? I was like, but this is really feeling wonderful. And then at one point I sort of, my mum was not right there, and I sort of drew her over, and I was quite teary actually. And I said, look, Mum, I'm feeling really exposed here. This is a really private moment happening in a really public place. And I kind of coached my mum at the time too to stay really close. I was like, Mum, I just need you here. And of course, my mum, my mum, she was peppering me with questions. Are you breathing through your nose? She was peppering me with questions. I said, Mum, I just need you to observe me and answer those questions if you can for yourself, because I was clearly,
you can't think. No,
I couldn't think. I was, So there's a couple of touch points. I'm like, oh, I think that was, pretty close. And then at one point I was a bit naughty. I let out a little pee and something came out, and I thought, oh, I think my water's motor broken. So I was in a public pool. I think my water's motor broken. It's a bit crazy. I know. So we quickly packed up. We went, okay, we'll go in the showers. We'll just catch our breath. So went in the shower, and I had black swimmers on. I think I could see membrane in the swimmers. So I was like, okay, this is, things are happening. And interestingly, I can't pinpoint in my first labor when my waters broke. In fact, I don't think they did. I think they were broken right at the point of actually pushing. I really wanted to have that. I really wanted to feel my waters break. So that was kind of cool. I was like, oh, I think I just had it. So anyway, it took me several contractions to get back into the car after the shower, holding onto the wall. It was pretty crazy. I just wonder what people thought of me, this woman walking along and stopping every few minutes to, breathe through contractions. Got into the car, and this is a funny point, because Mum was like, should we go to the hospital? And I said, no, let's go home. I said, I want to go home because I just want to catch my breath. And, I just had this sense that things would stop again. I don't know why, because all theory says when second labors start, they go quick. But I was a bit anxious to go into the triage, the waiting room of the hospital, because my experience there a week ago had been quite negative, in that I'd seen women I'd seen women in quite discomfort having to wait to be triaged, and I just thought, I just don't want to be there in this environment. I'd much rather be at home when things slow down and just breathe and, get my doula to come over and all that. So we went home, which was probably not the best decision, and called the doula, and she was like, okay, I'll come over in a couple of hours or an hour or so. She was a bit further away. Anyway, I got home, and as soon as I walked into my room, my beautiful room, which is it was quite dark, it felt like a cocoon, the contraction changed to a pushing one.
Oh.
So the first contraction I got when I walked in the door was push, and I called Mum and I said, I think I've got a pushing one, and we both just went ashen face, like, oh my goodness, that's not good. I mean, that's great, but it's also not where we want to be.
Yeah.
So we called the doula, we called the hospital, and they said call an ambulance. So we called an ambulance to actually come and see what was happening, and they were here so fast. So I mean, thank goodness we were in Canberra, not Sydney, because we called at 6:30. So I left the pool at about 5:30. At 6:30, we called the ambulance, and they were here at 6:39.
Wow.
At 6:57, we left my apartment. We got to the hospital at 7:10, and she was born at 7:17. So things happened very fast. And I'll just backtrack a little before I get to the big moment. But when the ambulance people arrived, a big issue I had was wanting to have that managed third stage, because I'd had quite a large hemorrhage with my first birth. I'd lost about 1.2 litres. So when they arrived, we said, do you have the Syntocin for the thigh? And they said no. And we said, well, we really want to go to hospital. So they looked at me. I think the contractions were like every 2 or 3 minutes. They were really regular, but she hadn't crowned yet. Like I was on the bed on all fours, trying not to push, but it was very hard not to. But they decided, okay, if we're going to go, we go now. So they put me on a stretcher. They put me. I mean, it's just crazy. There was this moment on the phone to the ambulance where they said, now, if the ambulance doesn't arrive, we'll talk you through how to deliver this baby. And Mum and I just looked at each other and went, how did we find ourselves in this situation?
Like going swimming to a public swimming pool.
We were so prepared. We're such, organised people, and that was definitely not our preference.
Yeah.
I think that would have been quite traumatic to put my mum in that role. I think her role is not that role. Her role is my buddy, my partner, not my, not the person that
the baby catcher.
The medical, the baby catcher, exactly. So that was a point we look back on and think, oh my God, thank goodness. So got in the stretcher, got to the hospital. The whole ambulance trip I was pushing. I was on my side, strapped in. She was starting to come out. I could feel like she was starting to crown. We ended up getting to the hospital, and they said, okay, do you want to hop in a comfortable position? And I said, yes. So they undid my seatbelt. I got on all fours. And several things happened at that point. She sucked back in. She went, really? What? Yeah, she was a bit out. Then she went straight back in. The back door opened, and a midwife came in and straight away put a warm compress on my perineum. And I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you. It was the nicest feeling. And suddenly I thought, I'm being looked after too. It was, the ambulance staff were first class. They were amazing. But that midwife touch of understanding what a woman's body needs in that moment was just such a relief. And the side door opened, and my mum came bounding in, and the ambulance guy said, in here we need calm. And she said, in here you'll get calm. And she pushed past him. It was fabulous. And she came right to my head. I know she wanted to be at the other end, but she was, I think the chat in the pool had helped. So she was right there holding my hand. I was facing her, and I'd been screaming a bit, but I just let myself go. This was my primal lioness moment. For about 3 or 4 pushes, I just let rip. I yelled, and it was amazing. And then she came out within a few pushes. She just went blop, and in the back of an ambulance in the loading dock of the hospital. Oh my God.
What a great story,
So
Nat.
that's
Oh
my
my
story.
goodness. Wow.
It was
Wow.
pretty, I mean, I don't do things in halves. And my mum was like, bloody hell, Nat. Sorry, I shouldn't swear, but she was like, gosh, Nat, you put me through the ringer. But yeah, so he came really quickly and the ambulance didn't
Yeah.
use the sirens. So there was no trauma. It was, while it was all
Beautiful.
very busy on the outside, I think
Yeah.
for her it was quite a quick
Yeah.
and easy delivery. So she
Yeah.
arrived beautifully healthy, and yeah, that's my birth story.
Yeah, it's a great story, particularly of timing of contractions. Sometimes we think contractions are always continuing to get closer and more intense, that it's a linear sort of process. But no, they can start, they can stop, they can be short, they can get longer, they can even stop completely for a while. And those sorts of moments can sometimes get in the way of women's confidence of trusting the process, and they tend to translate that of what's wrong, why isn't this happening, what am I doing wrong, what do I have to do to make it happen, when ultimately that whole process was really teaching you to just get on board with being okay with what they are, sleeping at night if you can, because when you don't have those extra night's sleep, that can have a huge impact towards the end of the labour when you really need your energy levels. So pacing yourself and sleeping, being as normal as you can for as long as you can, sleeping at night, really, really powerful. But potentially not going to a public swimming pool. Having your water sprayed.
Well, I got my water birth. It actually was an amazing experience. I just am very grateful to
The
that
beauty
pool,
of the
and
water.
thank
Oh,
goodness.
that's so funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could have gone wrong on a couple of moments. Thank goodness it didn't.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful feeling. I
Yeah.
really
Wow.
wanted to be in the bath, so I got a
Yeah.
very big bath. Yeah,
With a whole lot of people there.
with a whole lot of people. Yeah.
But it's interesting how you comment on, I felt really exposed. I felt really vulnerable. There was a point in your labour in that moment when you're at the pool that turned where you thought, oh no, come close to me, mum.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really primal response right there. Nat, what did you learn about yourself?
Oh goodness. What did I learn about myself? That I'm blessed to have a healthy body. That health is just, having that base level of health and fitness is just such a gift for when you have these moments. And no doubt about it, labor is intense. It really does test your body. I learned that I'm not a very patient person, but I think I did know that. I think the second labor was a lesson in patience, and I also learned that like lived experience, like you can learn all the theory in your life, all the theory in the world, have all the sort of conceptual reference points, but really at the end of the day, it's just labor is a surprise. And yeah, I think, what did I learn about myself? That that sometimes it's good to let your mind sort of go out of the way and just let you be present in the moment. And that's when the real, magic happens, when you sort of get your head out of the way and just experience it. I learned that I'm probably much more, I still find that decision to go home quite extraordinary, not to go to the hospital. And I don't know if it's because I was just too confident and relaxed in my own body, or I just still don't know what inspired me at that moment. I don't think it was fear, because fear would have taken me into the hospital. So it was.
Nat, I think you expressed the reason when you shared your story with us today. It was, I didn't want to be sitting in a room being triaged. I wanted to go back to my den, to where, and home is a place. I mean, really, home birth is such a powerful option. In fact, it's probably a good option for you if you choose to go again. It's such a beautiful two is enough. A beautiful option for women where they don't have to go anywhere, and that's where women do labour their best. So I suspect you just wanted to go back to that quiet, dark, beautiful place, as opposed to a hospital to be checked. Are you progressed enough? Do we give you a labour room, or do we send you back home to avoid all of that? You just completely misread where you're up to in your labour. Oh,
Yeah.
I think that's
I think I'm
beautiful.
still learning. I feel like,
Oh,
parenthood itself, but the birth, I think it's only been 8 weeks. I think I'm
Mm,
still, there was a lot of,
processing it.
there was a lot of chaos around me in that moment.
Mm,
And I do think the moment in which the midwife tended to me and my mum arrived, I think that's when I decided this is my chaos. I can't change it. I have to just embrace it.
yeah,
I can't change, I can't control what's
yeah.
going on around me. This is chaos. There is chaos. I'm in an ambulance. I did not plan to be in an ambulance. This is chaos. But I almost just said, okay, it's my chaos. I'm going to own this chaos and I'm just going to embrace it. And I'm going to have, the
Yeah,
moment now to, to push
roar,
the
roar
fear
my
out.
baby out.
Yeah. And
Let
it
me
was
ask you
funny.
this, Nat.
Yeah.
This being your chaos, is that what it's like being a parent?
Yes, I think the lessons of making the chaos somewhat your own and picking and
Letting
choosing
go?
what you focus on, letting go, and being patient, I think, with toddlers
Yeah,
is definitely a timely
yeah,
lesson at the moment. Yeah.
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 Can you see the connection? That accepting the what isness of your situation. And there's so many times when you're a parent, particularly with two, when there's more than one or even more than two, where they're all going at you at the one time, and you just have to get on board with what is. And if you get, it can be overwhelming, it can be hard, but ultimately you can do hard. And ultimately we're not in control. We think we are, and we try our best to control our kids, but it tends to work better. You said the magic happened when I let go, and that's what parenting is like. The magic happens of who your children are and what they're here to teach you and why they're here and how that all works. It happens when we let go and just get on board with who they are and accept whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, whether it be public place, having a toddler melting down at a public pool, not wanting to go home, or anything. We just have to get on board with the isness of it all. I just loved your story.
That's such timely advice with a toddler, just trying to get him dressed before breakfast. If
Yeah,
it doesn't work like that, let him have breakfast in his pajamas. Like,
yeah,
I'm just let go, let them. It's
yeah.
very, you're continuing to teach me, Tracy. Timely advice.
It's the path you've got to walk. And I just think when we look at the path and we see the intelligence of the path, both the pregnancy, coming to terms with, giving birth and going through the process of giving birth, knowing that we're ultimately not in control of that, and then getting on board with a newborn baby, high needs, unpredictable, can't make them sleep if they don't want to sleep. All of that is helping us to make the transition that we need to make to be parents of these unique little one-of-a-kind piece of creation. That's essentially what they are. So, Nat, thank you for sharing your story. There's a lot of great wisdom and a few laughs in those stories, which are beautiful stories for us to learn from. From Nat going through the process of coming to terms with what she wanted with her first birth, avoiding induction, starting to trust herself and her decision-making around that, getting the support that she needed to get Sid here and really being open to accepting that support. And then for baby number 2, having a labour that was unpredictable, starting, stopping, and, moving beyond this, do I have to make this happen, to actually just get on board with what is happening, to then being in a situation of birthing in the back of an ambulance in a loading dock at a hospital with a beautiful midwife who comes and supports you, and your mother at your head, connecting with you. Beautiful, beautiful moments for you to cherish. And I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to share that with us today. Thank you, my darling. Is there anything else you want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, look, I know you do ask people at the end of your podcast interview about what they would say to first-time mums. And I think someone said something to me, I think it was my doula, that having a baby is the only event that takes you to a hospital when you're not sick. And that is such a powerful thing. When they said that to me, effectively, we do have our babies often in hospital because we do know that we get wonderful care there when things go wrong. But the actual process of giving birth is not a sickness. So So I found that quite profound because I would share that with first-time mums, because when you are being pressured about induction and there are all sorts of clinical, medical language being applied to the process of giving birth, you can actually say, I'm not sick. This is a natural thing. It just is a shift, because there's nothing else. You don't go into hospital for any other. Whenever you go into hospital, you're sick, right? Or you need to have medical, you've injured yourself. But this isn't an injury. This is actually the one thing that takes you into hospital where you're healthy, hopefully in most in normal situations. So I think just flipping it like that and saying, okay, I'm in the hospital because that's where I can get help if I do get sick. But the actual going into hospital itself to deliver a baby doesn't itself need clinical medical language,
and learning to trust that.
Precedence over what is more of a physiological, again, the midwifery kind of culture. I'm so grateful for what is so far in our medical culture in Australia still a focus on the midwife and the mum and the child. I just think that's such an important part of our medical system that we need to preserve and we need to support. The 50% induction rate, it does worry me, because I've been so lucky to have had good advice and good support around me, that my body was able to do what it was made to do without that fear. So anyway, that's my final parting comment.
Thank you, darling. That's very wise. And thank you all for joining us again for another episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast. We'll be back next week. Thanks, sweetie. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. Transform Parenting is a childbirth and parenting education organisation that supports families through pregnancy all the way through the first 7 years of parenting. Why not watch our free webinar on Keeping Relaxed and Excited About Birth, where we discuss the 3 most important things that will change a birth. You'll find us at our website on www.transformparenting.com.au. Thanks for listening.